Good afternoon. It's my pleasure as Treasurer of the Law Society of Ontario to welcome you to this panel on mental health and legal professions, and it's part of Ontario's 5th annual Access to Justice Week. Je m'appelle Teresa Donnelly, la trésorière de Barreau. C'est un plaisir de vous souhaiter la bienvenue aujourd'hui. This Access to Justice Week event is organized by the Action Group on Access to Justice, or TAG, and the Federation of Ontario Law Associations, or FOLA. I'd like to start by saying that I am joining this program from my home in Huron County, and I would like to acknowledge that Huron County is located on the traditional lands of the Chippewa, Ojibwe Chippewa of the Anishinaabe group of Indigenous peoples, and Huron County is on the territory that is covered by Crown Treaty number 29, known as the Huron Tract Purchase of 1827. I also would like to recognize that the Law Society is in Toronto, which is the Mohawk word that means where there are trees standing in the water. I would like to acknowledge that it is on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. I also acknowledge the Haudenosaunee and would like to recognize the long history of all the First Nations in Ontario and the Métis and Inuit peoples. We thank First Nations people who live in these lands and for sharing them with us in peace. Ontario's 5th annual Treaties Recognition Week begins on November the 2nd, and it reminds us, as Tanya Talaga did yesterday in her keynote speech to open Access to Justice Week, that treaty relations are as relevant today as they were when they were first entered into. I'd like to talk a little bit about why we're here today. We know that stress, burnout, anxiety, and addictions affect members of the legal professions. This is a critical issue for the legal professions and the public, who rely on lawyers and paralegals to manage their everyday problems. Addressing mental health and addiction issues and wellness in the legal professions is a priority for the Law Society and personally for my role as treasurer. The Law Society has adopted several proactive measures arising from the recommendations of the Mental Health Strategy Task Force in 2016, and is continuing to study ways to support licensee mental health. I've reinvigorated that mental health working group, which was established in 2018. You may have seen that during Mental Illness Awareness Week, I shared my blog and posted tweets on mental health and wellness in the legal professions, because I believe that awareness and dialogue are key mechanisms for us to reduce the stigma associated with mental illness. The Law Society has funded Homewood Human Solutions to provide confidential counseling and other services to licensees since 2013 through the Member Assistance Program, or MAP, which is available to Law Society members, law students, licensing candidates, and their families. We will hear more about MAP during the panel. Events like this one are critical to advancing meaningful change and dialogue about how shifts in legal professional culture will benefit lawyers and paralegals, while also enhancing access to justice for the public. It is my great pleasure to moderate this panel. Before we start, I just have a few housekeeping notes. Please remain on mute for the session. You can change your view sessions by going to the right, up to the top of the page at the right, and changing it to the speaker. And towards the end of the program, we will have time for audience questions. And we would ask that you use the chat function. I want you to know, however, that the chat function questions will be going only to the host and co-host, and not everybody who's on this meeting will get to see the questions or who's asking them. So I'm going to start by asking the panelists to introduce themselves, and I'm going to ask Beth to please start. Just have you on mute, Beth.
Thank you. I do that more often than not when I'm talking online. Yes, my name is Beth Beattie. I started out as an articling student and then a lawyer in the litigation department of what is now Fasken Martineau, before making a shift to the public sector in 2002. I'm now senior counsel at the Ministry of the Attorney General, and I practice in the area of health law, again, litigation. My primary focus is on human rights, mental health, and OHIP eligibility. I have bipolar disorder and an anxiety disorder, and after keeping secret for 14 years, I came out publicly about 4 years ago and talked about my lived experience. And now I am a very active advocate in the area of mental wellness for lawyers. And I've done things like written articles for Lexpert and the Globe and Mail, and have made countless presentations to law offices and many of the large Bay Street firms. So I am on a mission to end the stigma and isolation surrounding mental health in our profession.
Thank you very much. Next, we'll go to Janet.
Thank you, Teresa. Pleasure to be here today, and thanks, Beth. I am also a lawyer. I work at the Medcan clinic, which many of you may be familiar with. We are an executive health clinic in downtown Toronto. As their in-house lawyer and privacy officer, I do all sorts of things, everything from drafting contracts to working with privacy issues. But truly the thing I'm most passionate about at Medcan is working with our health practitioners, both our physicians and the entire group of practitioners we have. What's incredible about Medcan is we are a holistic organization. We look at our clients holistically, and we have a very simple motto: eat, move, think. So we have people who are there to help with movement, with training, with physical wellness, but we also have a very robust mental health group that is composed of psychologists, social workers, and if needed, referrals externally to psychiatry. We also have a very well-informed medical team who are able to help patients with mental health challenges, both through the medical channel and then referrals when necessary. So I've come to have a personal passion about mental health. And the last thing I would say is I do a lot of employment law. The other angle I come at this from is employment law and the duties of employers to accommodate mental health, which I've spoken on before, and what we as leaders can do in our organizations and in our peer groups to ensure that mental health is a topic that is understood and properly given its attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Alysia.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Alysia Davies. I practiced as a lawyer for about a decade. I'm still an active member of the Law Society, but I am now also a counselor. And I now work with the Member Assistance Program at Homewood Health, a program that I actually volunteered with as a peer for many years before I joined it in a professional capacity. This is a program that you've already heard about a bit from Teresa this morning, but to give you a brief snapshot, it's a program that is fully funded by the Law Society of Ontario. It is operated completely separately from the Law Society of Ontario by Homewood Health, with a third-party administrative company in between to make sure there's a wall. This is in order to provide completely confidential services to lawyers, paralegals, law students, as Teresa said, any member of the legal profession who would like to benefit from coaching, counseling, or other support services. We also have a peer support program that I'll be speaking about a little later, and along with another lawyer slash counselor named Duran Gold, who some of you are probably familiar with, we run the peer volunteer program. So I'm here as a major advocate of mental health in the legal profession, someone who works as a counselor with members of the legal profession, and hears your stories every day about what you're going through and how you're coping. And I'm really looking forward to this discussion today.
Okay, so I'm going to start by asking each of you to respond to some questions that I have before we then open it up to ask others about the questions that they have for you. So I'm going to start with you, Beth, and I'm going to ask you, so we're talking about mental health in the legal professions, mental health of lawyers and paralegals. Why is this conversation important?
Thank you. And may I first say, I'm delighted to be on the panel with Janet and Alysia, because with Janet, I've used the services of Medcan and found it very beneficial. And then with Alysia, I'm a peer with the Member Assistance Program, and I found it to be a very effective program. So I'm delighted to be here with the two of you. I think the bottom line is that mental illness is rampant in the legal profession. There was a 2016 study done by the American Bar Association of over 13,000 practicing lawyers, and it was found that we suffer much greater rates of mental illness than the general public. So some of the statistics are that 28% of us live with depression, 19% of us live with anxiety, and somewhere between 21 and 30% of us are problem drinkers. So it's a huge problem in our profession, yet until relatively recently, we weren't talking about it very much. With conferences like this, we're talking about it much more and more over the last few years, but it really is quite recent. And it's in this day of COVID, even if someone doesn't have a formal diagnosis of a mental illness, living in this era of uncertainty, it's just trying on all of us. It sort of exacerbates our mental illness if we do formally have, like with me living with the depression and anxiety. But for people who aren't living with a mental illness, it can be a very challenging time. So I think it's particularly important now more than ever to talk about these issues, both amongst lawyers and paralegals.
Okay, and Janet, do you have anything to add to this about why this is important now? Or I could just change it a little bit and say, what changes do we need to make to really understand what's happening and to address what's going on with mental health?
Thanks, Teresa. You know, I think this is going to be a theme we talk about today. It really comes back to what Beth was talking about. It's the destigmatization of mental health issues. And, you know, I've used this metaphor before, and I used it with the group. You know, it's very easy for us to see somebody who's in a wheelchair and say that person has a disability, and there's going to be some accommodation necessary. We're going to need to recognize that and give that person some assistance. No one denies that. But mental health is that invisible potential, and I don't want to use the word disability lightly, but it's that potential invisible issue that Beth has spoken to, that it's not that easy to come out and say that there is a mental health issue in my life and I need help. And sometimes people don't even know if and when they do need help. And so I think part of the work that we do at Medcan is to say, if you feel that there's something that you just can't figure out, that your mental health isn't feeling what it could be or what you think it should be, reach out and talk to someone and don't hesitate. And I think the beauty of what is unfortunately the pandemic, what it has brought is there is this virtual offering now that is happening across the board in all sorts of treatment, whether it be talking to a physician virtually or talking to mental health professionals virtually. And that is going to allow people who heretofore might not have wanted to walk into an office of someone who practices mental health. They can now sit in the comfort of their home. And so that is going to help, I think, bridge that gap. And those who felt stigmatized or were afraid to talk about it, to reach out and get help. On the other side of the coin, and what we can talk about a little later, is the ability to, as Beth said, come forward and talk to people you work with and say, you know, I have a mental health issue and I need to talk to you about it, and not be afraid to go to their friends and employers to talk about that.
Alysia, anything to add to this conversation?
Yeah, you know, as someone who has kind of worked with lawyers in a counseling and social work capacity now, and previously as a peer volunteer, there's sort of a couple of elements that we're dealing with here. As Beth has pointed out, a lot of the rates of anxiety, depression, substance abuse are 3 to 4 times higher in the population of legal professionals than they are than in the average population. So there's a particular set of stressors and difficulties that are faced by lawyers and a lot of other high-performing professionals. So there's sort of a question that a lot of people ask, is it just that these kinds of folks are drawn to law, or is there something about the legal culture that sort of exacerbates these issues that is helping to create these statistics? And the answer is that there's sort of both elements in it. Legal professionals have very high stress jobs. They work long hours. There is a lot of bleed between their personal life and their professional life, their schedules, their timing. There are high expectations from everyone, clients, partners, peers, mentors, colleagues. And lawyers place a lot of pressure on themselves. By nature, lawyers are detail-oriented, they're perfectionists, they're hardworking, they want to perform in an independent, intellectually supported, admirable way. And it can lead to quite a bit of personal self-sufficiency. The idea that they will cope with things by just working harder, trying harder, and they don't need to reach out for help, and that it might look wrong, it might look weak, it might look less tough or less professional than it's supposed to if they admit to anything being a challenge or anything going wrong or anything not feeling quite right. So when you add that to the sort of stigma of mental health in general in the population, it's quite a situation. And one of the reasons that we have the peer volunteer program under the MAP is because often lawyers need to talk to someone who's in the same profession. Paralegals need to talk to someone who's in the same profession. Law students need to talk to people who've been through what they've been through. But they're too afraid to talk to anyone they know in the legal community. They're afraid of being outed as someone who can't hack it, who has mental health issues, those kinds of things, even if they're just dealing with an excessive amount of stress and don't have a lot of coping skills. So the idea of a confidential peer program was to kind of help people have access to someone who has been through similar things, works in a similar capacity, is going to understand, but it's an absolutely confidential relationship where people know that it won't go any further, so they can feel safe. When you add in COVID on top of all these standard stressors in the legal profession, you get almost a perfect storm, because people with families are trying to do extremely demanding jobs while also in many cases homeschooling their children, which is a full-time job in and of itself, and then coping with everything else on top of that. People who don't have that family situation might be sitting at home with no division between work and life at all, just working all the time because they can. Their liquor cabinet is down the hall from their office. There seems to be no division between workspace and life space, or work schedule and life schedule anymore. And everyone is expecting everything all at once in this giant uncontrolled experiment that none of us have ever been part of before. That's an awful lot of stress. And I'm hearing from an awful lot of people who aren't coping with it very well because we don't know how to. It's a new experience.
All right, so we hear that for what you're saying is that for lawyers and paralegals, the nature of our work makes it even more difficult for us to come forward. And you've suggested the peer-to-peer program. Janet, I'm going to turn to you and just turn it a little bit and ask you, what can employers or colleagues do to assist lawyers and paralegals with mental health issues? In addition to what we've heard about what Alysia said about peer support program.
Right, so I think there are a lot of ways to come at this, and I can speak personally from our Medcan experience. One thing that we as an organization who embrace obviously mental health and taking care of it is that we have implemented in our organization, and I think this could be done in small law firms, large law firms, If paralegals are, there are groups of people who may practice together, maybe not as a partnership, but who practice together as a group, to get those groups formed, which is going to be really, really important during COVID, that people feel and professionals feel that they have a group to reach out to. And within that group, one thing that I have talked about a lot with Medcan and keeping our people healthy and happy is just reaching out and saying, how are you? A lot of people are like, have you done this? Have you met this deadline? What's going on? I have found, because I work with just across the board, my organization personally, I'm not a psychologist, I just say, how are you doing? How are you coping? How are things going with your kids? And taking out those few minutes in a day to just connect with people and listen to them and talk to them. And what happens there is sometimes it will be, I'm great, I'm okay, but then sometimes it's not, I'm not okay, I'm not coping. And I've found this, more than once. And then that's the point at which it's time for a discussion to say, do you need help? Like, are you getting help? Do you have a support network? And so I think organizations and leaders and non-leaders, everyone really needs to be extra sensitive to take that time right now to treat each other like a family and to ask, how are you doing? And not be afraid of the answer. And then that goes back a little bit to the legal side of that, which is, I keep coming back to this duty to accommodate and the duty to take care of the mental health of our people in our organizations, small or large. Even if you're practicing with one other lawyer or practicing in a very small group. And if you don't practice in a group, it's time to reach out and say, hey, you know what? I need to have a little bit of a group. I need to have a sounding board and to get together maybe once a week. I know what Medcan does is managers will always have weekly check-ins. They might have a coffee or a drink time and just have a little social gathering, so to keep virtually connected. And I think that's important. It sounds like a social thing, but it's actually a healthy workplace thing. And employers and colleagues should be making those extra efforts right now. And when there is someone who's not okay, to talk to them and to help them find resources, whether it's through an employee assistance program, whether it's through MAP that's been talked about extensively, whether it's through calling up Medcan and saying, I need to talk to someone. Sometimes people need a nudge. And so I think we all have to do our part right now in that sphere.
And Beth, what about that? What about talking to people about it? How do we do that? We reach out, as Janet says, we start the conversation, but these are tough conversations to have. Do you have any tips for us about that? You're on mute.
Okay, I'm going to keep myself off of mute.
Okay, good.
If you see someone on your screen with their arm in a sling, you're going to ask them, hey, what happened to your arm? And the same thing goes if one of your colleagues appears to not be doing very well emotionally. They're looking quite haggard, they're wearing the same clothes day after day, all of that. If you just get that sense of the black, bags under the eyes, that sort of thing, it's fair enough to say to them, how are you doing? You don't seem like yourself lately. Are you okay? And historically, we haven't wanted to pry into people's personal problems, but sometimes we really do have to break the silence around mental wellness in order to help people feel supported and get the help that they need. And I gotta say, from all of the mental health advocacy work that I've done in the legal profession, I've really recognized that lawyers and paralegals want and need to talk about their own mental health. And it really is, it's just like Janet said, it's a matter of just saying to them, hey, how are you doing? Are you okay? Is there anything that I can do to help? And I want to just briefly touch on the topic of suicide, because suicide is an issue in our profession, and we've had a couple of deaths in the last few years with Crown attorneys. That was just terrible for them, their families, as well as colleagues. And if you think someone's at risk of suicide, just ask them point blank if they do have thoughts of suicide. Now, that might go counter to what are commonly held beliefs that, oh, if we raise suicide, it's only going to make things worse. and Alysia can let me know if I'm incorrect about this, but my understanding is that the majority of mental health professionals think that it's important to raise the issue because the person will feel heard and the person will feel supported. And I think it just goes back to once someone starts sharing their story with them, just make sure they know that you have their back. What they say to you, you're going to keep in confidence, and tell them that you're glad that they've told you a bit about their story. And my advice is to not give any advice, just let them share their story and ask how you can support them. And in terms of helping people get the help that they need, a good place to start is with the general practitioner, a family physician, because I've heard before, oh, she needs a psychiatrist. In many cases, a psychiatrist is not needed. General practitioners are usually very familiar with the most basic psychiatric medication in terms of anxiety and depression and so on. So it's a matter of reaching out to that GP. And as Janet pointed out, the employee assistance program, it may be that a colleague really isn't doing very well, and you can help them just get the numbers, help them make the calls, follow up to make sure that they made the calls, that sort of thing. And certainly the Law Society's members assistance program is wonderful, as is the peer-to-peer group is also wonderful. In terms of education, I can't say enough about people learning more and more about mental illness, the common illnesses in our profession, whether it be anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, addiction, eating disorders, and just learn about those issues and what can be done to treat them, because I think you'll find much comfort that many mental illnesses can in fact be treated. And then just a final thing on education is the Canadian Bar Association put together a very good program on mental wellness in the legal profession that I highly recommend. And for those of you who may be short about hours, it's worth 6 professionalism hours. So, and it really is a terrific program.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there, and I'm going to break down some of the things that you've talked about, and I'm going to ask Alysia these things. So Alysia, Beth brought up suicide.
Yes.
So can we hear from you on that?
Beth is quite right that when counselors and other mental health professionals are talking to people about these issues, you do ask very directly. You ask very specifically, do you not want to go on? Are you having feelings like your life is over and you want to end it? And I think that Beth has emphasized something really important in saying you need to listen to the answer, because people are often very uncomfortable with that kind of situation. They're like, oh, well, you have so much to live for, and they start kind of cheerleading, and the person will just shut down and stop talking to them about it. We'll hide it from them. One of the things that we do with the peers in our program is we provide them with a initial training in active listening, which is one of the most sort of important cornerstones of all mental health support. And it's something that lawyers and legal professionals who are trained and used to leaping in with solutions, right? I can solve your problem. We're not used to doing. So it's counterintuitive for a lot of us. And it's something that needs to be really kind of practiced and honed. If you're going to ask people how they are, you need to be prepared to listen to the answer sympathetically and completely. Otherwise it might sometimes do more harm than good, depending on how you approach it. People don't need to be argued out of their feelings. They need to be heard. And especially in cases when someone is feeling suicidal and has taken the extraordinary step of confiding in you.
Okay, I'm still breaking down Beth's answer. So Janet, I'm going to go to you and ask you, Beth talked a little bit about getting help. She talked about the GP, she talked about EAP, she talked about MAP. Do you have anything that you want to add to this conversation about that?
I was just going to commend her, because I think that a lot of people really don't understand that starting with a GP is often the best step. If somebody has certain mental health confusion, really a lot of GPs are excellent, and they more and more, and I can tell you from my team that I work very closely with, we have, I think we have almost 100 doctors and specialists. So I work with a large team of doctors, And what I hear from them is that the mental health component of what people are calling in for is huge and has grown during COVID. And so that's a really, it's not good, but it's good that our patients are reaching out to us and reaching out to our doctors as a first line. So Beth, I think that was a really good call out. There are also doctors who specialize, and they're called GP psychotherapists, and it's something that I don't think everybody knows about. So if you do just want to go through a traditional OHIP, situation and see a doctor, and you can do a little, legwork on it. I believe Medcan had or has someone of that ilk, but they are GPs. It's fully OHIP billed, and it's a GP psychotherapist. And so they are a little extra trained on the mental health issues. And if there is a requirement for a referral, look, as Beth said, a lot of people say, oh, you need to see a psychiatrist. If you talk to an MD, they will say to you, hey, maybe you need to see a psychotherapist, maybe you need to see a psychologist, maybe you need to see a psychiatrist, maybe I can help you with some sort of medication. So it is a really good starting point when people don't know where to start and they don't want to, for lack of a better word, self-diagnose. So I think that was excellent, but I think it's a really important point.
Okay. I'm going to keep asking you questions because Beth also raised the issue of education. And she talked about how important that is and about some of the things that are out there. Do you have anything, Janet, that you wanted to say on this topic of education and educating ourselves?
I think, I think this is, my fourth or fifth panel that I've spoken on, and it's on this topic of mental health, destigmatization in various ways. And so I think really there is a need to educate our profession on these issues. And I think that Alysia really hits home a really important point. Lawyers are a tough group. Again, at Medcan, a large part of our clientele is the legal profession because we're all downtown. And as a group, we are definitely at higher risk for all of these issues. And so to get the word out to the legal profession and to continue to drive it home is important. I think that these panels are one of the best ways for people to receive that education. I think that in terms of other examples, like Beth, I don't know if Beth, we can publish your article or share your article with the group.
It's shared in the notes.
Right, so reading personal stories like Beth's, I know that there was a recent article by one of Toronto's top employment lawyers who shared his story of his alcoholism and his addiction issues. And I wrote a personal note to him. I said, thank you for coming out with your story, because really people, when they see people who are at the top of their game running a great law firm and they come out and they say, here's been my struggle, that is to me one of the most powerful educating forces. When you see people who, like Beth, come out, share their stories, to me that's incredible. And the more people who do it, the more people who will do it. And I think that's a very empowering experience for people, and will give them that courage.
And Alysia, do you have anything to add just on this education piece?
One of the things that I like to emphasize is people tend to think of mental health as being, people who are well versus people who are not well. And it's a spectrum, it's a continuum. People maintain their physical health by doing things like eating well and going to the gym. And we think of that as natural prevention and kind of proactive stuff about, oh, I've got, I could get sick, I'm going to keep my body well. Well, mental health isn't really that different. If you are undergoing an unusual amount of stress, it's okay to do something like call up the MAP and talk to a counselor, or talk to your doctor, or talk to anyone else who might be helpful to find out, how you're doing. You don't have to have what you think might be a mental health problem. You might just be having a few weeks or a few months of not knowing how to cope. Of needing someone to talk to, of needing to learn a few skills that could help you maintain your mental health under difficult conditions. So I think one of the things that would really help to destigmatize this issue of, sort of mental health problems, is the fact that mental health is something that needs to be actively maintained as a part of daily life, just like anything else. And that includes knowing your limits, that includes talking to people, that includes resilience, that includes having skills to kind of manage some of these situations, to know when you've had enough. So I think that, you know, talking about the broader topics of stress and how it affects everyone's mental health, it's going to negatively impact everyone in one way or another, is really important. One other thing that I would put in very briefly for people who are interested in, you know, getting specialized learning, like they'd like to be able to assess, you know, when they need to worry about a colleague and that kind of thing. The Mental Health Commission runs regular courses called Mental Health First Aid. So it's like a similar, like St. John's Ambulance First Aid course. It's the equivalent for mental health and learning the basics of different mental health conditions, signs to look for, ways to speak to people. It's something that I think a lot of managers might find particularly helpful.
Very helpful. All right, so we've touched on this a little bit, and in some of the answers that you've given, each of you've spoken of the impact of COVID. So I note, Beth, in the paper that you wrote that we've shared the link to in the chat, you said, and this was published in August of 2019, you said that the legal profession is in the middle of a mental health crisis. And I note that today the name of our panel is The Invisible Crisis, Coping and Caring for Mental Health Today and Post-Pandemic. So I'm going to start with you, Beth, and ask, how has COVID impacted on licensees' mental health? And just to get to an understanding of how, you know, it's impacted on lawyers and on paralegals.
I just, before I get there, I just want to comment on something that Janet and Alysia both referenced. I think, and people might fight me on this, but I think virtually everyone would benefit from therapy. And it's not just for people who are living with a mental illness, but it's people who are having marital problems. It's people who are having rebellious teenage kids. It's people who are caring for elderly parents. Like, it's just a good therapist will help you learn your triggers and how to respond to them. So I'm a big advocate of therapy. In terms of how COVID's treating us, it's one of the impediments in our profession is that we tend not to reach out for support. Part of it is that we just feel that we don't need to. We want to be self-reliant, and we don't feel that we need to reach out for support. And we also see that we want to be portrayed as being strong and unflappable. And the concern, especially for me as someone with bipolar disorder, such a significant disorder, I don't want to be seen as inherently unstable and unreliable. So that's why I was quiet for those 14 years. And with the general population, only 1/3 of people reach out to get help. And I suspect with lawyers, it's even worse than that, because again, we just, our personalities and our fears of being seen as weak. So I think that we have to get comfortable, and part of it is through stories of lived experience, that you can have a mental illness and be very strong at the same time. Now, in terms of COVID, I find it fascinating how everything is blurring together, like time is blurring. I've got clients emailing me at 10 o'clock at night about things that really aren't urgent. And so it doesn't matter whether people are sending it at night or in the middle of the morning. They just, I think they sit at their desk, something pops into their minds, and they think that they can send out the email. And I think we have to the extent that we can, try to put the brakes on that. I don't think our clients want to be working that hard, let alone the lawyers working that hard. So I think we have to somehow switch what's become the new normal. And I think we have to be delicate about that, because we don't want to offend our clients. But at the same time, I think that we do have to push back a bit. I don't know about you folks, but I am just not getting outside. Like, you would think that sitting at your at home, you'd be able to get outside at the lunch hour. I'm not getting outside. Like, I am tied to my desk. It's quite something. So I think to make that concerted effort to get outside, studies have shown that cardiovascular exercise is just as effective or almost as effective as taking an antidepressant in terms of combating the symptoms of depression and anxiety. So it's really important that we make the time during the day to get some exercise in and get the blood flowing. I think we have a long fall and winter ahead of us, and we just have to, as part of our like health, to make a concerted effort to get the blood flowing.
Janet, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I work for Medcan, and I think highly of what we can offer people, but, you know, to go back to our motto, and it doesn't have to be Medcan, it can be any resource that offers similar types of things. You know, Medcan's, you know, living words are eat, move, think. And I think those three words have never been more important than during COVID. And sometimes people just don't know how to eat well, how to move well. And now it's a lot harder. I belong to a gym. I'm devastated when it closed down. It was a huge part of my daily ritual and routine of staying healthy and mentally well. And I agree with Beth, you know, the cardio and the physical activity is a huge booster for everyone's mental health. So, for example, I've taken up running, right? And I'm not a marathon runner by any means, but trying to find that thing that is going to keep you healthy during the pandemic is key. I know that virtual training has become all the rage, and not just at Medcan. I mean, people can find virtual training that they can do in their home, virtual classes. It's not the same as going to a gym. But I know that there has been a huge uptake. For example, at Medcan, our clients who did train in our gym have now switched over to virtual training, and that is a huge part of our mental health during the pandemic. And I think that the other things that are really important, for example, and I mentioned this to the group when we spoke, Medcan has specifically carved out times of day when we've said there will be no meetings, there will be no booking of you know, Teams meetings that we all get tired of. So between 8 and 9, for example, no, we're not setting meetings. People need to get their kids to school. Between 12 and 1 or whatever lunch hour, there are no meetings. And on a certain afternoon, I think for us it's Wednesday afternoons, we've blocked off the entire afternoon so that people can just have some time. And so I think Beth is totally correct. Everything is blurred together. And so organizations and people, and if your organization doesn't do that, take 5 minutes, block off your calendar, as I used to do for my workout during the day. And that was my time. And I would say to people, unless there are 10 people, I'm doing my spin class and I'll see you at 1. And, you know, we can't be afraid of advocating for our mental health. And there is absolute health in saying, I need to do exercise or I need to eat well in order to stay healthy. And then if those don't help enough, yeah, there's other help we can get, but let's start there with our good eating, our moving, and keeping our thinking healthy.
Alysia, anything to add to this topic before we turn and see if anyone in the any of the participants have a question for us?
Yeah, I'd like to take the opportunity to talk a little bit more about the MAP services, because I want to make sure, you know, I talk to so many people in the legal profession who aren't actually aware that these services are available and are free. And there is a phone number, I'm going to put it in the chat before the end of this, and a website where you can just reach out and talk to a counselor. We offer kind of short-term counseling for people who are going through stress, couples counseling, family counseling. You can be matched with a peer in the peer support program as well, in addition to talking to a professional counselor. There's coaching services available, parenting coaching, anti-smoking coaching, nutrition coaching. If you're having problems with your finances, there's a whole suite of supports there as well. If you're dealing with more complex and difficult problems, we have a full long-term depression care program that helps people providing full cognitive behavioral therapy for depression and anxiety, trauma care, which has specialized services for people who have been through anything extremely traumatic or have symptoms of of PTSD. These things do not have to be legally related. You know, you can call in, your family can call in. This is a general mental health support service with options all along the spectrum, from just stress to really difficult problems. Homewood is one of the oldest mental health service providers in the country. They also do inpatient treatment for substance use disorder. There's such a huge range of services available. And I'm talking to a lot of people who are falling apart right now, who are hiding it from even people in their own family, and who just need somebody to talk to. There is so much help, so close. You just need to reach out in whatever form you're comfortable. It's a difficult 5-minute phone conversation to connect with that help. And once you get past that, you're going to find a whole other world on the side of it. One that many of our clients have told us, you know, I'm so glad I did this. My life has really changed since I started talking to you. It's so much better. So I'm going to put the information into the chat, and I really encourage anyone who is interested in these services just to even reach out, just to find out about them and get some more information.
Okay, so we have our first question, and I'm going to follow up with you because it relates to unemployment. You know, for lawyers and paralegals who are not working, it could be very, very stressful. And the question is, are there Law Society resources for this? So I'm going to ask you about, you know, you've talked about all kinds of different coaching. Is there something that MAP provides that can assist a lawyer or a paralegal who's struggling with this?
Yes, there is career coaching as part of the suite of services offered by Homewood. So that's another thing that you can reach out and connect with. Homewood doesn't provide a career mentoring services. The Law Society, as you know, has a separate sort of mentoring program for people who want to connect with others in the field for those kinds of things. But as far as career coaching, as far as counseling for low feelings when you're struggling through your job search, there's a whole suite of supportive services that definitely could help. Absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to ask people if you have questions to use the chat function. We have a couple, so I'm going to move to the next one. This question is, you know, I love hearing lawyers and paralegals telling other lawyers and paralegals to support one another. But at what point should we shift our mindset that lawyers and paralegals aren't good at mental health? And should we have a mental health professional on staff or readily accessible? If someone had a broken arm, I wouldn't set the bone and make a cast for them. So I'm going to take that one to Janet and then go from Janet maybe to Beth.
Hi, I think that's a great point. And I think that goes back to our earlier discussion. It's that difficult moment from understanding that someone may need help, talking about it, and then what do you do about that? And I think I can't remember who said it, but really one of the keys, the first key is just listening to people, right? As lawyers, I think it was Beth or Alysia who said, we always want to come up with an immediate solution. Well, here's what you're going to do. Sometimes somebody who's struggling just wants to be heard, and we all do. That's just human to want someone to listen to us and understand what we are going through. So to open it up as a lawyer and to let someone talk. And then at that point, the discussion may not be, here's what I think you should do. It's like, how do you think I can help you? Is there something that I can do to help you, both either as your friend or as a lawyer, as a colleague? And can I help you find support or resources? And what do you think? And sometimes if you know, and I found this because I do a lot of not employment law, but I work with a lot of our HR issues as an in-house lawyer. A lot of the time, a lot of people may know what the next step is, but they just need that little springboard of a colleague or another lawyer. So to the person who's asked the question's point, we as lawyers are not trained to necessarily do what's needed, but just to be that support and be that springboard for them to find the next step, whatever that next step may be, and just to be sometimes a listening ear, and that person may just walk away and do something about it because someone listened and cared and honored the challenges that they're going through.
Beth, anything to add to this?
Yeah, I would agree with the person who asked the question that it's important to hire mental health professionals in organizations that are large enough to be able to afford it. So for instance, many of the Bay Street law firms, I imagine, would be able to afford to hire a mental health professional. So I'm all for it. I mean, the reality is that mental health is such an issue within our profession that there's real upside. I mean, I think from a business perspective, a business model, it makes sense to hire someone full-time to help address mental health issues within the organization. And in fact, that's something that we've done recently at the Ministry of the Attorney General. We've hired a mental health coordinator on full-time, and she's helping to facilitate programming. She's liaising with the senior management team. So we're taking it very seriously. Government is not hiring much these days, but we hired this person.
And Alysia, for the organizations that aren't big enough for that, tell us about MAP and your organization and what it can do.
I think that the nice thing about the MAP program is, a lot of firms may have employee assistance programs that they've, sort of funded or corporate employers, that kind of thing. The great thing about the MAP is it's a profession-wide program. It's funded by the Law Society as a proactive measure, because when you are dealing with long-term stress on your own, maybe you've hit triggers, maybe certain conditions are starting to develop, maybe a substance dependency, something like that. In the long run, it can lead to very negative things for your personal life, for your career. And the whole idea with the member assistance program is to have something proactive that people can fall back on, even if they're working for someone who can't afford to fund a lot of benefits or an employee assistance program, even if they're unemployed, even if they're a student. Even if they're struggling with, all kinds of financial difficulties, it's something that's easily accessible to everyone here. So it's something that I think is important to take a look at and consider as part of a whole bunch of things. And as I mentioned, I think that training in mental health skills for managers is actually something that's really important too. I'm not involved in this sort of area of services at Homewood, but it does offer separate services to employers that talk of, coaching managers to handle difficult situations, someone who might be having a breakdown at work, that kind of thing. So there are sort of further services for employers available that perhaps if you have a particular employer who might be interested in that, it might be something they want to connect with. There are similar services out there. And I think that just general mental health literacy can help, but the questioner is right. Lawyers cannot use individual self-reliance to solve all the problems here. We really need to be connecting to each other in the community and connecting with supports and resources and learning more about what can help.
Okay, we are almost out of time, so I'm just going to do sort of a quick round, and the answer may be the same for all of you, or they may be a little bit different, but I'm going to ask you for your top 3 tips for lawyers and paralegals on this issue. So I'm going to start, Janet, you get to go first for your top 3.
Top 3. I thought I had my top 3, and I'm going to just come up with them right now. I think my top 3 is don't be afraid to speak up. And I think my one tip is it's COVID. And I think the greatest quote that comes out of this was Alysia, this is a giant uncontrolled experiment. And we all need to know it's okay to not be okay right now, because none of us are as okay as we usually are. So my takeaway is just to say it's okay. Take away that it's okay to not feel okay right now. It's okay to be struggling right now, but it's also okay to proactively reach out, do something about it. And I think today has provided us with, a whole host of ways that we can seek help and also take care of ourselves. Just make that, as hard as it is, to make that extra effort to get that help, partner up with someone maybe, and just look after ourselves more carefully now than ever.
Beth?
Yeah, one of the things that I talk extensively about in that paper that I wrote is the need for role models. And those are people in the position that they're practicing law, they're paralegals who are successfully practicing, managing their illness, and showing that it is possible if we get the care that we need and the support that we need, that we're able to carry on in our day-to-day jobs. So I really, we have a number of role models out there. They're starting to come out. Justice Gascon came out a year ago or so to talk about living with anxiety and depression, and we need more of that. And it doesn't have to be someone on a big platform. It could just be someone in the office or online that sees someone who's not doing very well and reach out to that one person. So I'm very keen on role models, and that will have a trickle-down effect once people start speaking out. The other thing is just relying on social support to reach out to your family and to your friends when you're struggling and get the support that you need. And sometimes it's scary, like the idea of reaching out to a colleague, but I gotta say, from the very beginning, I made a presentation to all the lawyers and staff at my office, let's say 3 years ago, and it was agony leading up to that. And once I made the presentation, I was amazed at how much support I got. And I really haven't had any negative feedback once I started reaching out and telling my story. So relying on the support of our family, friends, and if we can take that step, our colleagues. And the last thing I'll say is exercise. We've got to be exercising. We've got to be getting the blood flowing, getting outside and getting the exercise. Or if not getting outside, being down, being online with YouTube. There are all sorts of exercise programs, yoga programs, all of that. And we have to fit that into our day.
Okay, Alysia?
I'm just going to say that people in the legal profession are trained to identify and prevent worst case scenarios. So that's the thinking along which a lot of lawyers and paralegals, thoughts run. And so there's this sense of, oh, that's not going to work, or that's just going to do this, or, I am kind of doomed. They're kind of going to sort of the worst case scenario in their head for their own personal lives. These problems are, in many cases, a lot more solid than you think. I have talked with so many people who thought that their careers were over, who thought that their lives were over, who thought that their families were going to fall apart, who thought that they couldn't come out in public about these things. And they all say, I'm so glad this happened because my life is so much better now that I am doing things differently. So it's not like, this is a feel-good subject, but it is a topic where the scenario that you have in your head about how it's all going to be a disaster if you kind of move ahead with acknowledging this, my observations time and again are that it's not true.
Okay, so we're just about out of time. And I said at the beginning that we were partnering in this conversation with FOLA. So we are joined today by John Kochenko, who's the first vice chair, and we're going to ask him to make a few remarks.
Thank you very much. FOLA, the Federation of Ontario Law Associations, we're an organization that represents 46 law associations across the province, and together we represent approximately 12,000 lawyers, most of whom are in private practice, and we're honored to be part of this initiative. On behalf of all of us who have tuned in today for this Access to Justice Week program on coping and caring for mental health today and post-pandemic, we extend our sincerest thanks to our panelists, Janet Ozembloski, Alysia Davies, and Beth Beattie, for sharing their thoughts and experiences. And in addition, I would also like to thank our moderator, Treasurer Teresa Donnelly. I learned a lot today, and I appreciated hearing from all of our panelists, and I now better understand the MAP services available. And Beth's comments on the all hours emails and blurring of days in this COVID time really resonated with me. And we're all under a great deal of stress, and more so during this pandemic, but we're all in this together, and we must continue to talk and discuss this very important topic, ending stigma and isolation, and making us, hopefully, gentler and kinder to ourselves and to others. So for our viewers, I remind you that this is only Tuesday and a full week of Access to Justice programming, which is going to be in full swing until Friday. And the upcoming events can be found on the Law Society website, as well as on our FOLA website, shamelessly self-promoting us. And please check them out for the times and topics. The conversation about mental health does not end today, but continues every day. And if you're seeking further information on this topic, we encourage you to visit us at fola.ca, where you'll find mental health and wellness resources for your use. Again, thank you all for taking time out of your busy lives to join us today. Be well and be kind to each other. Thank you.
Thank you. And that concludes our session today. Thank you very much for joining. Merci.
Thanks, everybody.